Hi, I'm Chris McBrien, a Gen-Xer, and the pop culture from my generation is awesome.
And I'm Yancey Eaton, a Millennial, and the pop culture from my generation is dope.
Episode 36, District 9 Movie Review. Hey, Chris McBrien here, along with Yancey Eaton. This is Pop Goes Your World. Yancey, I got to tell you something if I could just jump in before we
go ahead.
start. Okay, so, I'm not a huge... You're more the music guy than me, right? I mean, that music's more your thing than me. But about a year ago... No, I mean, not quite a year ago. Maybe it was like back in September. Anyway, about 8 months ago, something like that. My wife says to me, if you could go to see any concert, who would you like to go to see? And I was like, well, that's a pretty good question. I said, I would like to go see Rick Emmett in concert because I went to see, remember we did an episode of the podcast where we were talking about our first concert we ever been to, and I said it was Triumph. So I'd like to go back and see Rick Emmett in concert. I'd like to see ZZ Top, and I want to see the Bare Naked Ladies. Those are the three bands that I want to see. So anyway, so my wife jumped right on it, and for my birthday last year, she took me to go see Rick Emmett, and it was a great concert. We talked about that. ZZ Top is coming up in about 2 months. I'm going to see them, and I got tickets to go see the Bare Naked Ladies. They're coming to Aurelia, which is about a half an hour outside of Barrie, where I live, and it's the Aurelia Folk Festival, and they're going to be playing it. They're the headliners that are playing at it. So this is kind of a big deal for me. I'm going to see, in less than a year, I'll have seen the three bands that I wanted to see more than anything. So
I mean, really, why keep living at this point if you've just knocked off all the bucket list items?
Well, once August rolls around, exactly, I go to the Folk Festival and see the Bare Naked Ladies, I can just
ship it in. You're done.
I'll just continue driving, and I'll just drive right into the lake, and then we'll just call it a day. So there you go. The Fish That Saved Pittsburgh.
My parents watched this with me, and they hated it, like a lot of movies that I've already mentioned on this show.
Breaking 2, Electric Boogaloo.
Man, Eddie Murphy did some of the best impressions I've ever heard.
Shabadoo and Boogaloo Shrimp.
Chris.
I've rewatched it as an adult. I still like it.
This brassiere is killing me, and this garter belt is riding up my ass.
Oh, my.
What could possibly go wrong?
My parents pieced out like halfway through it.
I'm good, thanks.
Yep, we're good.
Okay, so this week we are doing something a little bit different, and we, stemming off of last week, what we did was we decided to challenge each other to watch movies from our generations, the movies that mean a lot to us or help define our generation in some way. And of course, last week I threw Blazing Saddles at you, and we debated that movie. And at the end of the show, I said, okay, your turn. You throw a movie at me that we'll watch, and you want to remind everybody the movie that you chose.
All right, so the movie I chose was a 2009 science fiction film called District 9, and it basically takes place in like an alternate 1982 where an alien ship stops over South Africa, and as opposed to these aliens being like hostile, like taking over, or super intelligent creatures who are here, with like social superiority, they're basically refugees, and they take dominion over a large swath of South Africa for, decades, basically. And there's like a whole bunch of interesting themes that go back and forth with that. But I chose this film not intentionally being completely as on the opposite spectrum of Blazing Saddles as I possibly could. but this is one of those films for me that's always kind of been anytime I mention it to people, there's always like a really small number of people who've heard of it, and even smaller of people who genuinely love this film. And this is probably one of my top 5 or 6 favorite films of all time. So I was really excited to hear that you hadn't heard it yet, or hadn't watched it yet rather, and just to kind of like break it down and stuff. I'm actually dying to see what you think about this, because I think it's just one of the most original, well done movies of all time.
And that kind of leads into like the question I was going to ask you, and you answered it a bit, but we can expand on it a little bit, because so I basically throw it back to you and I say, okay, you name any movie at all, any millennial film that you want to name, and then we'll come back next week and we'll talk about it. And you chose District 9 of all movies, so I mean, like, you could have picked anything, like, almost any movie. And I'm just wondering why you mentioned a bit of why you like it, but why District 9 over anything else? Over a comedy, or over any other adventure films, or any other of these big blockbuster movies, these, like, why District 9?
I think it's because I have like a really small list of questions. I don't know if you do this, Chris. Maybe I'm just crazy, but I like to ask people really esoteric questions whenever I meet them for the first time, and I'm just trying to get like a feel for, if they're on the same plane as far as weirdness goes with me. And this was a this was a semi big film. I think it grossed like 200 something million in the box office globally, but it's kind of a niche film, and I think it's one of those where it didn't get nearly the play that it should have whenever it first came out, and it's not really, like a present film and the pulp culture psyche. It's incredibly well done. It's my favorite genre, which is sci-fi, and it's just so weird enough and it's so obscure enough that I don't know, it's one of those things where if people connect with it and they know about this film off the from the get-go, I don't know, it kind of connects me to them, as weird as that sounds. And this has always just been like one of those temperature gauges that I've used to kind of see what type of person that person is. So
well, you will be glad to know one thing. I actually really enjoyed this movie a lot.
Oh, thank God, we could still be friends.
Yes, I thought it was really, really, really good. But the one thing is, I will say just off the top, I thought it was really good. But you know what? And I don't know if this is a millennial thing versus a Gen X thing, but I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe I'm totally crazy on this. You mentioned maybe you're crazy. Maybe I'm crazy too. Mm-hmm. For me, it seems that a lot of Gen X films, a lot of the favorites, and a lot more that I'm going to be throwing at you over the next couple of weeks, they have a huge rewatchability factor. Okay, so you can watch them over and over and over and over. I've probably seen Blazing Saddles 50 times, and I'm not kidding. Like, I've seen it so many times, over and over and over again. And a lot of the other movies that we'll talk about in coming weeks, I've seen over and over and over again. The thing that stuck with me with District 9, and it still resonates with me, and by the way, I just watched it last night for the first time. Mm-hmm. So right before, so it's very, very fresh in my mind. But one of the first things one of my first takeaways from it after watching it was I don't think I would watch it again. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how many, you've seen it more than once, I'm assuming?
Yeah, I've probably seen it 15 or 20 times since 2009.
Okay. Wow, that's incredible. Because to me, it didn't have that rewatchability factor. But that being said, I thought it was really, really, really good. So that being said, I guess, do you want to just kind of lead the conversation? Do you want to ask me questions about it? How do you want to approach it? This is your movie. This is your this is your wheelhouse.
So we could just go back and forth on it a little bit. So I think one of the reasons why I like it, like I mentioned, sci-fi is my favorite genre, but it's not just a science fiction film. A lot of, say I'm watching Alien, there's no larger social, ramifications to that film. It's basically just a science fiction film about an alien. It's not trying to say something bigger than, people are trapped on a spaceship with an alien that's trying to kill them. You see what I'm saying? There's no grand scale. There's nothing that we can apply to our day-to-day lives now. But with this movie, it's a direct. It's addressing all kinds of narratives. I don't know if you did any research on this, looked on Wikipedia or IMDb or anything, but so the film is based in South Africa, right, in Johannesburg, and it was much of the film was filmed in South Africa itself in actual slums where dirt poor people are living in shacks and stuff. So a lot of those vast, huge scenes that you've seen of barrios, actual slums, that is real people's lives, and so it's touching on a country that for decades was ruled by the apartheid. So there was tons of racial segregation. You've I'm sure read about Nelson Mandela and everything that went on there with the apartheid and stuff. But it's basically a mirror image of how we treat these aliens when they come here as refugees versus how real people would treat other people. Even in Africa today, there's so many different countries that are in constant war, either civil war or border wars. And it's just because, they could look exactly alike, but they're from two dueling countries, or, you're not a true Nigerian or a true South African. There's a lot of that stuff going on. And even though this film was made in 2009, if you think about it now, what we have going on with the Syrian refugee crisis, I think it's incredibly pertinent that we kind of talk about stuff like this. And throughout the course of the film, he basically addresses this where he sees these creatures are called prawns, which is basically a South African word for a cricket, because they they're bug-like, they look like insects, and the general assumption is that they're stupid and that they're not very intelligent, which of course that isn't the case at all. So it's kind of playing on these social paradigms a lot, and like I said, it's not just this alien film. So I guess my question for you is, that was just a long way of just talking without actually asking a question, but so when you were watching the film, are you picking up on that at all? Do you see how this is drawing parallels to what kind of we have going on today as far as, like I said, the refugee crisis or racism or identity crises and, things like that? Was that something that was prevalent to you, or did you just see it as like an alien movie?
Oh, no, absolutely. I did. One of the first things that I thought of was that, a lot of thought went into this movie. This is not just a science fiction film. It's a political film. It's very clear right from the get-go for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned. The thing that stuck out to me was that, okay, first of all, this alien craft comes down and hovers over top of a city, not over New York, not over Washington, not over Paris. No, it's over Johannesburg, South Africa. So, I'm thinking, why is that? And then there's the obvious parallels to, by the way, the ship originally comes down, it's 1982 when it first came down there. And so automatically the parallels to the apartheid era are there. It's very, very relevant. But the thing is, like you said, the interesting thing is this film came out in 2009, but it resonates more in 2017 than it did even then when it was released. And for all the reasons you said, because of what's going on in Syria and things, I thought some of the things that happened, especially in the third act, which I'll come back to in a minute, the third act of the film was very, the way it was shot was almost confusing, like some of the almost the video game moments, I'll call it, and I'll come back to that in a second. But in some of the sort of video game moments of the third act of the film, it's so confusing. The thing that struck out to me was, like, in Syria right now, it's not a black and white situation, and I mean that, I guess, figuratively. It's not very easy. Those are good guys, those are bad guys. There's these guys, and those guys don't like these guys, and they don't like them, and it's very confusing. And in some of the scenes in the third act where there's all the shooting going on and stuff, it's like you don't even know who you're shooting at. Who's good? Who's bad? Like it was, and I think it was shot like that on purpose. So yeah, like I say, I think it's a very political film. And like I say, I think it resonates more today than it did then. Some of the interesting things of my takeaways on those themes were, right near the very, very beginning of the film, because it's shot in a documentary style. Right, obviously, and they're doing like
a lost. It's almost like a lost footage type.
Yeah,
thing.
It's kind of like a found footage film, except it's done in like a documentary that was shot, right? And they're interviewing people, and they're interviewing the one girl, and she's a black girl, and she's saying, why are we spending our money on these prawns? And like, this doesn't make any sense. We should be spending our money on ourselves and not them. And I'm thinking, wow. I mean, I'm hearing people on the news saying that, yesterday. Those very same things. And I thought it was very interesting that the fact that because they're aliens, it's like, here's an opportunity finally for somebody that we can all hate together. Right. You know what I mean? Yep. Like it's still all about hatred and racism, but it's like now we have one, particular sort of alien, quote unquote alien, race that we can all equally agree that we all hate them, Right. So yeah, I think it was extremely, extremely political. There's a lot of thought that went into this movie, and there's a lot going on in this movie.
But I think one thing that was interesting too, that you were talking about how, we can all hate this one particular group. I don't think it's as clear cut as that, because, if during this entire thing, for those of you that haven't seen the film, these aliens are basically in I guess you could call it like a concentration camp, right? They're in like a refugee camp, but it is absolutely, abhorrent conditions. It's disgusting. They're not taken care of very well. And they're basically there for 30 years, and then it gets to a point where the people of South Africa want them to move. They want them, just like in the 60s, whenever, you had District 6, it was like this actual inner city residential area where it was only for white people in 1966, right? So it was complete racial segregation. So they basically get tired of these people, these aliens, these prawns living here. So they decide that they're going to go door to door and literally evict them. They're going to serve them eviction papers and force them to move. What's really interesting about that, though, like you said, like it's a universal hate, but it actually wasn't. Like there's all these like little inklings of there's a second side to this where they were talking about how it's illegal to shoot them, how you have to give them 24 hours notice for an eviction. There's certain basically like a standard operating procedure when it comes to dealing with these people, and they are treated as refugees as opposed to just aliens or invaders or intruders and stuff. So that tells me that there's this conflicting side that actually does see these things as something more than just a monster. You know what I mean? Why would we go through all of this and build a concentration camp for them and put these rules in place to make sure that they're treated humanely if there was just a general consensus that everybody hates them? You know what I mean? And that's kind of like what we're seeing today, where you have certain countries who are a lot more open to taking in countries. Germany, back in the 40s, everybody knows Germany was a monster that took over the world and, killed a lot of people. And they've almost like course corrected and did a complete 180, where now they will take in anybody. They put them to work. They house them. They do all of these things. And other traditional powers, aren't as open to taking in, sick and refugees and stuff like that. One thing really interesting about this that I had read, Chris, there was a writer, and his name was Chris Mikesell, and he was basically talking about how you can literally substitute Black or Asian, Mexican, an illegal, a Jew, a transgender person. You could take any type of those, historically disenfranchised groups or minority groups or anything like that, and just replace it with the prawn in this film, and you can see that it's like a really obvious like hidden dialogue. I mean, it's hidden in plain sight, but it's right there in your face. I mean,
I agree with you. Sorry, I agree with you 100%. I would suggest anybody out there that has seen this movie, and hopefully you have if you're listening to this podcast, because massive spoilers, obviously. But if you've seen the movie, go back and watch it again, and substitute the word prawn with the word refugee.
Yep.
Exactly what you're saying. I agree
100%.
100% with that. That's true. It's, like I say, it's very, very political. Just another thing I mentioned about the aliens that you touched base on there. Aliens used to be portrayed in the movies as the bad guys. That was always the way. You look at War of the Worlds, The Day the Earth Stood Still, movies like that. And then it was Spielberg, really, that came along. He kind of flirted with the idea that, what if aliens were friendly? Like when he made Close Encounters and then E.T., right?
Or Super 8.
Yeah,
Super 8 was awesome too, yeah.
But in this movie, the idea is that aliens are not only harmless, but they're also mistreated by humans. They basically make the humans the bad guys. And I guess we did see some of that in E.T., like with Peter Coyote and the cops chasing E.T., and capturing him and that kind of stuff. But it was just, there's a lot going on thematically in this movie. I'd like to touch base for a second and ask you your thoughts on, because, any film needs a strong protagonist, and the protagonist in this movie I thought was a very interesting choice, and it was the actor is Sharlto Copley, who plays it, and he was not an actor coming into this movie. He was a producer and got hooked up with the director somehow, and then, hey, I'm going to be in the movie, because I think he was in the short film that the director had made previously, was Alive in Joburg. So he's like, okay, so he's in this, and I thought he was an interesting character, because it's like Wikus van der Merwe is his name, right? And the thing is, right from the get-go, he's basically thrust into this situation to be the guy that's in charge of going in and rounding up all these prawns and moving them off to the new concentration camp outside of town. So we don't have to look at them anymore, and we can put them out there, kind of thing. So they put him in charge, but he's like an I won't even say anti-hero. Like he's not who you would expect, and everything, it goes right down to his his clothing. Because, he wears, that sweater over the short sleeve shirt. His wife is way too good looking for him. You know what I mean? He's almost emasculated, the way that his mannerisms are, the way he talks. He's like a goof. He's like not somebody who you would think would be in charge of doing this. I know he got the gig only because of, his father-in-law, of course, Right. But it was, so I thought he was a very, very interesting kind of character to play, and then obviously the story arc that his character takes is obviously transformative, literally, right? But but so what are your thoughts on him as the lead character, and what was your take on that?
I thought it was interesting, like you said, this isn't like if you were casting like a major motion picture, an alien sci-fi film. Excuse me. I don't think that he would be the type of, archetype that you would be looking for with this, but it does work because, he comes into this, and I think he does a really good job of being somebody who he comes into it with no moral, hesitancy whatsoever. And, he's civil to these people to an extent, but he's also very degrading in how he talks to them. Right. And,
he's basically a jerk. He's basically a jerk at the beginning.
He's a jerk. Yeah, he's a jerk, and he's incredibly tone deaf. And it's one of those things, like, they were trying to set it up too. This entire movie is about duality. Every single thing has like multiple sides to it. With his character, like, they were interviewing, it would show film of people being interviewed that had worked with him, colleagues in the past, family members and stuff like that. And you would hear one person say, like, he was always super normal and by the book and straight. Like, I would never expect this of him. And then you would see somebody else who would say, I always knew that he was off, and, there was just something weird about him that he would do something like this. So, like, it's always something like there are two sides to everything, just like we mentioned with like the prawns, right? So they would show them doing all these disgusting things and eating cat food and, ripping cows apart and showing the slums that they live in. And, it was very propagandish. You'd only see the bad things about them. But, of course, as the film progresses, you would see that there's actually a lot of really positive attributes about them that, if you never actually get inside there and see it, you won't. What I loved about his character, though, is how they did shift it. And like you mentioned, him actually being transformative. As a spoiler, yes, we're talking about the entire movie, but he actually starts changing into these animals by, he has this liquid that's sprayed into his eyes, and it basically starts changing. He becomes like a chimera. At one point, he's half prawn and he's half human.
But, and sorry, I'm just going to jump in on that because, the interesting thing I thought was the more he became an alien, the more human he became.
Yes.
Because he became more sympathetic, he became more humane. It was interesting that it took that transformation of him turning into the alien, and the more that he turned into the alien, like I say, the more of a human he kind of turned into.
Chris, that is literally the exact point that I was going to make. That it took an actual physical embodiment of him actually becoming one of them to be able to fully empathize with them, which is kind of sad because, if that's how we as people are going to be, like, if I could never understand, like, the plight of African Americans being a white male, like, we're doomed. You know what I mean? I'll never be able to fully empathize with them. That's really sad. But, like, to be open to the fact that other people who look different or come from a different background are going to have it more different without actually having to be, inside and, like, living their life. That form of, like, heightened empathy, I think, is super, super important. And it was basically showing that too. Like, this guy is in the slums. He's walking amongst them. He sees exactly how they live. There's all these different things going on with them, and he's still completely impervious to any type of understanding or trying to get to know them or seeing anything until, like I said, he literally is forced to physically transform into them. And even still, it takes towards almost the very end of the movie. There are scenes where they're trying to retrieve this one device that's basically act as like a jet fuel to get his little passenger ship back up to the mothership that's still floating in the sky 30 years later, right? And there's all these opportunities where these mercenaries, these government mercenaries, are trying to kill him and stop him and the other alien that they're in cahoots with. And so you would think that there's like this connection, they have this bond, but even towards the very end, whenever he has a chance to help this alien, he's saying, I don't care about the prawn, take the prawn, I'm going to run. And it takes the very last act for him to finally realize that this alien, this prawn, like you said, is almost like a more perfect personification of human morals than he is. You know what I mean? It's so weird. Like I said, everything in this has a duality. There's two different parts to it. It's what you want to think about a prawn versus how they really are. It's what you think about what this main character is and what he eventually has to become, both physically and, morally speaking. There's just so much to it. And like I said, the fact that it's just a perfect mirror image of the apartheid and this, refugee crises going all over the place that we have going on now. It's just, to me, it's just a perfect film. And we haven't even touched on the fact that for this film being made in 2009, which I know wasn't that long ago, it is incredible looking. I mean, some of the special effects, super, super inventive. We didn't even mention the fact that this was produced by Peter Jackson. So, I mean, there was everything from top to bottom, from the casting to the special effects. Is just incredibly well done. I don't know if any particular things stood out to you, but just their weaponry, the cruel way that they actually shoot humans and what happens to those humans, they basically liquefy.
Yeah, they just explode, like totally explode.
Yeah, I don't know if you'd ever seen The Expendables. You ever watch those with like Sylvester Stallone? No. Those movies are super corny, I admit, but I've watched all three of them in theaters with my dad and my brother, and the special effects on those were just out of this world, not what you were expecting. And that's what I kind of got with this film too, where you would think that it would be like this really small budget, kind of poor CGI, not particularly great. But even, like I said, back in 2009, it still holds up as like a really, really beautiful, well done film.
Well, you mentioned duality of the film, which I thought was an interesting take on it, because that even holds true for the fact that it's a documentary style film with these incredible special effects. I am a Gen-Xer. I do not for the most part, you know how I feel about CGI. I'm not a big fan of it. I think it all looks like crap. But I think because it was done with the grainy film footage and stuff, it worked. But you're right, it was definitely done very well. Because all of the aliens in it are CGI'd. All the prawns are CGI'd. And they actually, it comes across pretty well. Just to go back a second to answer your question, some parts of it that really stood out to me, the third act, as you mentioned, the third act. To me, that's where the film came apart a little bit for me, because I thought it was a little bit odd. The first, 2/3 of the movie are very political, like we said, everything's going on that way. And in the third act, it kind of reverted to like standard Hollywood shoot 'em up stuff to me. And I don't know if it's because now this director, the guy who directed the movie, Neil Blomkamp, was originally pegged to make a movie version of Halo, the video game, and that fell through. Right, that didn't happen. So to me, that kind of came out in the third act of this movie. It's like he got his chance to do it there. But that being said, especially compared to the fact that last week we did Blazing Saddles, and remember last week I was talking about how Blazing Saddles to me looked like it was shot like it was live theater. Like all the scenes are like two cameras. Like it's like one scene, Lily Von Shtupp gets up and walks over, the camera moves with her. There's no like edits or whatever. That being said, you could not have gone to a crazier, example of the complete opposite than this. I would have hated to have worked on the editing of this film, because the editing was incredibly complex. Like every single scene, the editing was off the charts. I mean, it was nominated for an Academy Award for the editing. It was nominated for 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. But it was nominated for Best Editing, and deservedly so. It didn't win, but just what a you talk about duality again. Like, talk about what a difference between Blazing Saddles, the editing, and this movie. Like it's a total one-off. The other thing I thought was interesting was at the very beginning of the movie, I was like, when they went out and hired this MNU, right, the Multinational United, to come in and round them all up and take them all out and get rid of them, get them out of our cities, right, was the whole idea. And the only thing that was going through my mind was and maybe it's because MNU has 3 letters and ICE has 3 letters, but it was like watching on the news this immigration and custom enforcement that you're seeing on the news on a regular basis doing this very same thing. So again, the things that resonate in 2017 are pretty incredible. I thought another thing that I thought was interesting was some of the scenes reminded me, because I know that you love this TV show Cops. There were scenes in it that was like, this is like watching an episode of Cops. Like there was one scene where they went in, they were rounding them all up, and the one, I'm assuming it was a girl, and she was wearing a bra. And she come out and she's got a pink bra, and she's running around. I'm like, this is like an episode of Cops, because she was urinating outside. That's what it was. She was urinating and she's wearing the bra. I'm like, this is like a freaking episode of Cops here. It's just so. I mean, so there's satire in it as well. But again, very, very, very political. So those are some of the things that stood out for me, in the movie.
So let me ask you this. Okay, let's get real basic with it.
Sure.
So let's use the Rotten Tomatoes scale. Let's use like an IMDb rating. Like if you had to give it a 1 to a 10 from a science fiction genre standpoint. Like if this isn't your go-to type of film, obviously you wouldn't rate us as highly. But just as a standalone science fiction film, 10 being the highest, what would you give it for a rating?
You're probably gonna not like me very much, but I would probably go no higher than a 7 and probably a 6.
So what, like a 6.5? We split the difference?
I'll split the difference. I'll go a 6.5.
What do you think it lacks to put it up in that pantheon of like a 7 or an 8?
Rewatchability for me is really, really big. Like I say, I wasn't a big fan of the third act, so those are 2 things that were knocks against it for me. I thought no, I don't want to say that he was a weak actor playing the lead role, but essentially, when it comes down to it, he really was. But I thought he did a lot better in the second act when he started to transform and stuff. Then I thought, he was actually doing a pretty good job there. Overall, as political satire and stuff, I think it rates high in regard to that. But as an overall film, I know I'm going to get tweets, I'm going to get emails, but I mean, I didn't love it.
This isn't nearly as popular of a film as you think, so I don't think you're going to get nearly the tweets that you think. So, but what were you saying? You'd
be surprised. People put me down for everything I say on here, but it's all good. But I know I'm coming from a different place, because I mean, I'm coming from stuff like Close Encounters and E.T. Those are kind of movies that I kind of pull from in terms of aliens and that sort of thing. And to watch this, like I say, I did enjoy it, but I probably wouldn't watch it again. So for that reason, it doesn't rank quite as high, but I did think it was good. I did like it.
I appreciate that. I mean, it doesn't hurt my feelings if you don't
just being honest,
completely love it. Yeah, but one thing I will say about this, and I'm sure you can agree with it too, from an originality standpoint, like we always talk about, basically everything is a remake of something else. There's a lot of elements from this that you can pull from other films and video games and TV shows and stuff like that. It definitely has its influences, but just from an actual plot standpoint, this is like a very, very original film, and it's a take on the whole alien, genre that we've never really seen before. And that's one of the things that originally drew me to it. And like you mentioned, like the whole, they want to do a Halo video game movie. And, obviously I've talked about my love for Halo, and just the fact that it is so original, and they do make something political out of a genre that typically you don't see a lot of social commentary on. For that alone, I think I give it a much higher bump than that.
Okay, I will give you that, because I'm one of the biggest critics there is of millennial films, that all they're doing is just remaking stuff. And we did an episode a couple shows ago about remakes, reboots, and reimaginings, and it's like Hollywood has no original ideas. They never do. Like I'm the biggest, it's like a mantra of mine. But you're right, this is very original. I got to give you that. This is a very original film. It's a very original idea. It has a lot to say. Like I said, I think a lot of thought went into the movie. So it has a lot going for it. The movie's very good. It was nominated for Best Picture. There's a reason for that. The editing is incredible. Like I said, the political commentary, there's a lot going on in this movie, and there's a lot going for this movie. But again, I'm a Gen Xer, so, I'm stuck in the past. I don't like anything new. Well, that's the biggest thing. I don't know. That's just me. So, but you know what? Overall, I thought it was, I still think it's an interesting pick. I think it's an interesting pick. It was not what I would have expected you to pick, to bring to the pod for us to talk about. So that being said, for the next show, here's what I'd like us to do. If you're game, for the next show, then okay, we're going to go back to one of my picks. I'd like to go back, because I think this is an interesting film that I think we need to spend some time talking about next show, and I really want to get a millennial's take on this movie, because from a just from a filmmaking point of view, from a special effects point of view, I would like next show, between now and then, for you to think about this and come back and be prepared to talk about the 1975 Steven Spielberg classic, Jaws.
We're going to go for a big one.
Let's do it, okay? So next week, let's talk about Jaws, because I have a lot invested in that film emotionally. As a kid, I first saw that movie when I was 7 years old at the drive-in. My mom, maybe against her better judgment, I mean, God love you, Mom, but she decided to take me to the drive-in. I convinced her, you got to take me to the drive-in to watch Jaws. And I did, and I was scared out of my pants. I've never been so scared in my entire life as being 7 watching that movie. I was terrified, and it kind of stuck with me to this day. And since then, I've just grown a huge appreciation for that film. I love that movie, and I am dying to hear what a millennial thinks about that movie. So you ready to do that next week with us?
Yeah, I'm down to. Let's do Jaws.
That's going to be good. All right. Well, until next week, this is Chris McBride for Yancey Eaton saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thank you for listening to the Pop Goes Your World podcast. Continue the conversation on Twitter at @CMcBrien or at Yancey Eaton. Please consider leaving a review for the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.